Westminster. Today, for the first time all year, we're going to sing a hymn, a long-standing Westminster tradition. Those of you on Zoom can hum or sing along. Please stand and join in singing the hymn on page 482 in your blue hymnal.
Life is a journey, not a destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Krasnowski for playing that beautiful hymn. I love singing hymns in the chapel, especially when we are all in here together. But even at our current capacity, there's something special about a whole community joining together in song. I feel like at this point in the year, it would be a little redundant for me to introduce myself. Of course, that is, unless you don't tune into the weekly Zoom assembly webinars, which frankly, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. If you don't know me from my time on your screen during advisory, then perhaps you might recognize me as the kid who dresses up in coat and tie every day, despite the different dress codes this year. However you know me, I want to thank all of you. It has been a tough year for everyone, but I've been so grateful for this community and your constant support of me throughout the year. Recently, amidst this somewhat chaotic college process, I spent some time reflecting on my journey to Westminster and my time here over the last 4 years. Before Westminster, I went to an all-boys Catholic school called St. David's in New York City, where my family and I have lived in the same apartment for my whole life. From an early age, however, I knew I wanted to go away to boarding school, or at least leave the city. Like any young boy who loved sports, all I wanted was a backyard I could run around in and a basketball hoop in the driveway. So naturally, when I heard about boarding schools, the huge sprawling campuses with acres of green space, in addition to getting to live in the same place with all your best friends, to fifth grade me at least, it seemed pretty awesome. My school only went through 8th grade, so I was going to need to apply out anyway. Of course, I had a very tough conversation with my mother and tell her I wanted to leave home. As an only child, this made things all the more difficult, but I think after 4 years and almost weekly visits to campus, I think she's come around. So we decided I would be only looking at boarding schools, and out of all the schools, Westminster was the one I really didn't know much about. I didn't really know many students from St. David's who were at or had gone to Westminster, but it was actually the first school I visited. I remember the drive up. It was a beautiful October day. The sun was shining and the leaves were starting to turn, and I was really nervous about this interview I was going to have. I walked into the admissions office and met with Mr. Pringle. Luckily, I think he saw how nervous I was, and so he threw me a few softball questions to start off. And eventually, at some point, I calmed down as I realized there was nothing really to worry about. And so as I left campus that day, I saw glimpses of what just seemed like a really special community, filled with incredible kids and faculty members. I knew this was a special place, but I had a lot of other schools to visit, and I didn't yet know that Westminster was the place for me. So over the next few months, I stayed in touch with Mr. Pringle and continued to visit schools. And then, when March 10th came, I was lucky enough to be accepted to a few different schools, including Westminster. I utilized each of the school's revisit days and had a great day here at Westminster. But even after all that, I was still struggling with my decision. Then, of course, the inevitable April 10th day rolled around. I would have to make a final decision. I remember the day vividly. One of my best friends who had applied to many of the same schools I had just decided he was going to the Taft School over in Watertown, and another one of my classmates had chosen to go to Hotchkiss over in Lakeville, all schools I had been considering. But truthfully, I had no idea really where I wanted to go. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my parents, talking about it, and I remembered some wise advice given to me early on in the process. They said you could go through and look at what each school has to offer, and look at all that really, really closely. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the gut feeling inside. I still didn't know many people at Westminster besides Mr. Pringle, and I had lots of friends going to some of the other schools I was looking at. But ultimately, I chose to come to Westminster. I think it was a surprising decision for my family and even some of my friends. But deep inside, I knew that in 4 years, I'd look back and I'd know I made the right choice. Fast forward to the fall of my freshman year, I'd never had a true fall sport that I played. And although I wanted nothing more than to get on a football field, my very protective mother was not going for it. So rather than go and play fourth soccer or something like that, I chose to run cross country. I don't think I really understood how hard this was going to be, or really what cross country entailed at all. I don't exactly have the cross country runner type build, and it isn't a sport that translates with the sports I grew up playing as a kid. We'd go to meets, and I would be lining up next to kids who weighed about half of what I weighed, and to be honest, I struggled with it. But I kept working at it and worked hard every day during practices, and eventually got to a point where I felt like at least I wasn't embarrassing myself. Perhaps, though, more importantly, I also met a ton of kids I would have never really gotten to know had I not done cross country. Guys like Ryan Chakobny, Chris Whipple, Connor Seeley, to name a few. Seniors at the time who helped me navigate this transition to life at Westminster. I still keep in touch with them today. Through it all, I learned so much about myself, my strengths, my weaknesses, and also that I didn't have the brightest future in competitive running. As I look back, choosing to run cross country that fall was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. For my third form English class, I was lucky enough to have Mr. Service as my teacher. For those of you who are new this year and don't know Mr. Service, he was probably one of the most fascinating and interesting teachers I've ever had. His classes were certainly unique, but I learned many valuable lessons from him. One story I love to share came at some point during the first term. I didn't know Mr. Service as well then, and I felt like my grade in his class could have been higher, so I went to talk to him about it one day. When I inquired about this, he replied, "Grades are not important, William. Knowledge and wisdom are important." My whole perspective on life changed. I realized the true value of intellectual curiosity, the importance of studying for the sake of personal growth, rather than the satisfaction of arbitrary grades. But I also learned the importance of being process-based. Sometimes we often worry too much about results, on the outcomes. Instead, however, Mr. Service explained to me that day how important focusing on the process is, on the pursuit of success, the pursuit of knowledge, rather than the arbitrary values we associate with them. Before the fall of my sophomore year, I was hoping to get a room in Squibb Dormitory, one of our nicer dorms here on campus. Unfortunately, I was put into Alumni House for a second year in a row. I was not really expecting this and not very excited to be away from most of my friends who were in other dorms. And for those of you who haven't been to Alumni, it is what it is meant to be, a freshman dorm. It has cinder block walls, inexpensive furniture, for a reason, and bubble hockey in the common room. But I ended up living there for a second year my sophomore year, and although I wasn't too happy about it at the beginning, it ended up being a great experience. I became close with many of the freshmen that year, helping them navigate the beginning of their Westminster years, just as others had helped me. And as a sophomore, I became close with many of the seniors living in the dorm as sixth form proctors as well. After a year in Squibb my junior year, I chose to do the Alumni 3-year living plan and come back to live with this year's freshman class, which has been a lot of fun. Living in an Alumni dorm for 3 years is a feat I don't think a lot of people have done, but I feel lucky I can boast that fact as, although it might not be the dorm we like to show on our campus tours, I think all of us in there this year would agree it's by far the best dorm on campus. One of my proudest accomplishments over my time here was to be elected captain of the JV hockey team alongside Nate Stevens under the coaching of Mr. Charlie Griffith. Throughout my time as an athlete, I've always struggled with referees. However much I tried, I could not possibly keep myself from telling an official that they were wrong when I believed that they had made a bad call. This behavior ultimately led to an incident where I was thrown out of our JV hockey game because of my constant arguing with the officials. Not a great look for the captain of the team. After numerous conversations with Mr. Griffith, it was clear that I needed to change this bad habit of mine. And so, I continued to work on biting my tongue on the ice and began to see the value in controlling the controllables, something my lacrosse team hears me utter a lot these days. This mindset that I was able to work on as a member of the JV hockey team has aided in my growth, not only as an athlete, but as a person. I still struggle with referees to this day. My time with Mr. Griffith on the JV hockey team opened my eyes to the value of focusing only on what I can control, a lesson I've needed to remind myself many times this year. I came to Westminster because of a gut feeling that it was the best place for me to grow and be myself. Deep inside, I knew it was, and there's no question it has been. Over my time here, either by choice or as circumstances dictated, I found myself thrown into situations that I might not otherwise have expected. I could go on all day telling stories about my time here through these seemingly comical and basic anecdotes. And while I didn't find success everywhere I went, I grew from these experiences and learned valuable lessons along the way. We're often told that we should take certain classes or do certain activities in order to reach our goals. We see paths laid out to us by our parents, teachers, advisors, mentors. These are all obviously necessary and important aspects of being at a school like this. But sometimes we can forget the importance of taking a step back and following your heart, paving your own way forward. I had Xander read that Robert Frost quote at the beginning of chapel for a reason. There's value in taking the road less traveled, as Frost notes in his poem. Our lives are filled with choices. Each day, each week, each month, each year, we hit forks in the road and we choose to take one or the other. Oftentimes, we make our choices based off of what we think we should do, maybe the clearer path. I urge you all, whatever choice you may be making, big or small, to remember the words of Robert Frost in my journey here to Westminster, to consider taking the road less traveled. You never know, it might just make all the difference. I know it has for me. Thank you.